Hello, everyone, and thanks for popping in on Fire Safe Sonoma's monthly program, speaker series, we call it. And each month we have a special guest that we have on a program that talks about something related to wildfire or wildfire risk reduction. And this month, we have Ben Nicholls from CAL FIRE joining us. So you'll be looking forward to that in just a moment. And by the way, I'm Roberta McIntyre, and I'm your host. I'm the president and CEO of Fire Safe Sonoma. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us, joining today. And just a reminder, last month we had Jason Mills on to talk about sustainable understories and broom management. So if you didn't get a chance to see that, it is up on our YouTube channel. And then I have to remember to speak a little slow for Spanish channel. Next month, we'll have Frances Rosatier from the Redwood Empire Dispatch Center, or REDCOM, on the program. And she's going to tell us how the emergency dispatch system works in Sonoma County. So if you're interested in that, join us next month at our regular day and time, and you can learn all about that. So this month is, of course, Ben Nicholls. He will be talking about CAL FIRE's Wildland Fire Seasonal Outlook. So what we're going to do is take a look into Chief Nicholls' crystal ball kind of a thing. And he's going to share with us so far from the data available what the Wildland Fire Outlook looks like possibly this season for us in Sonoma County. And Chief Nicholls, he's a division chief for Sonoma County Operations Unit. He has 30 years of experience with the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. We call that CAL FIRE. And he's been a part of firefighting operations on all major wildland fires in Sonoma County since 2017. And he's worked in a variety of programs and specialties throughout his career, including wildland and municipal fire protection, emergency command center operations, fire prevention and law enforcement, pre-fire vegetation management division, Defensible Space Inspection Program, public information, education, grant administration. I could go on and on and on. I actually shortened it a little because I'm running out of voice and my dog's getting loud. So with that, I welcome Chief Ben Nicholls to help us peer into his crystal ball to see what the future holds for us. Take it away, Chief Nicholls.
Thank you, Roberta. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Welcome, everybody. As Roberta mentioned, as we do this presentation, you guys are the first one for the year to go down the crystal ball avenue here. So bear with us, because here we are in April and we're going forward here. So let me get this slideshow underway. Can everybody, I'm going to switch that, give you a little peek into the future here. All right, can everybody see the full screen? All right. So fire season 2024 outlook. This is a picture I took a couple weeks back in the Shiloh Regional Park within the footprint of the Tubbs fire. So this is a great sign of the resiliency of the landscape and the fact that not all areas burned in the course of a wildfire or in a fire period are a lifelong change to that landscape. So a lot of great green grass, things are healthy out there. And as we've seen, we've had plenty of rainfall this winter. So we're at another above average water year to date. The map on your left is the state today, or as of April 9th, last week when I was putting this together. And compared to 2023, it might be easy for the crowd to say, well, we didn't get quite as much rainfall. But whereas the state, as you can see in the smaller image, received a substantial amount more of rainfall in 2023 at this time, here in Sonoma County, we're doing equally as well, if not better than we did last year. So another great rainfall year for us. And as Roberta mentioned, the crystal ball. So the information we're going to be talking about today is where we're at today, where we are anticipated to go, and some tools and techniques that we can do to prepare for those fires that are coming. So predictive services put together by our personnel up at the Northern California Geographic Area Coordination Center, also known as NORTHOPS, puts together a 4-month outlook based on the information that they have and the long range forecasts. But as everyone's well aware, the farther out you get in forecast, the grayer that information becomes. So this is a snapshot in time, early April, as we push forward into fire season. But that being said, we're starting the fire season cycle off at a much better state than we had been in the last handful of years. As we go over to the Sierra, we talk about snowfall. And again, while we haven't received quite as much snowfall as we had this time last year, as you can see on the far right side of your screen for the year totals, we're doing much better than we had been, and we're still above average where we would be for this time of the year. So a lot of snowfall in the Sierras means that a slower start to fires in the Sierra, and therefore less resource draw across the state, which keeps local resources local, as opposed to being gone, say, on the Dixie Fire or elsewhere in the state. Which then brings us to the drought situation. So what you have on the screen right now, the large image is where we were at April 11th of last year. And then the far side of the screen was where we were at the same time in 2022. So we had a drastic change in our drought conditions coming into fire season last year. And it basically pushed us out of the drought, and it was just the far corners of the state that were still in those drought conditions. As we roll into this year, those areas have further eroded out. So now we have just a handful of fingers into the state with a abnormally dry condition, but not in the moderate and severe droughts that we were seeing before. Footnote there on the side of the screen, this year, as of April 9th, when I put together the report, 35, just short of 36 inches recorded for the year for Santa Rosa. Compared to last year, that was, just shy of 41 inches, but well above the 29 inches that we average year to date in the Santa Rosa recording station. So we've talked about the weather that we've had. Now we're going to talk about our current weather and where we're trending to go. So on the screen here, if you look at the far left side of the screen.
I'm on a Zoom.
Sorry. Far left side of the screen is what is noted as NC02. And that's a predictive services area that we use for evaluating current fuel conditions and expected fire behavior. And that's the zone that we are in. So it's the mid-coast to Mendocino. And if I use the laser pointer here for you, that's at the top of the deal here, mid-coast to Mendocino. And it's this red zone that basically extends from the Marin County coast up to the top end of Mendocino County and almost out to the I-5 corridor along the coast mountain range. So what we're going to be talking about here is the available fuels and the expected burning conditions that we're going to see, or that we are seeing currently, and the trends as they push deeper into fire season. So when we talk about these fuel conditions as a crash course on some wildland fire behavior, fine dead fuel moisture is what is the catalyst or the representation on the probability for ignitions of a wildland fire, and or the material that allows that energy to be created for that wildland fire to transition into live fuels and create what we see with the major fires that we see across the state. So when we're talking about fine dead fuel moistures, we have 1 hour fuels, 10-hour fuels, 100-hour fuels, and the larger forest material 1,000-hour fuels. So this graph here is the 1,000-hour fuel moisture monitoring for what we're experiencing here in the mid-coast and Mendocino predictive services area. This graph, as you'll see here in a second, it's easy to read if you're looking at them regularly, but it doesn't jump out to you if you're not regularly going through these graphs. So when we get to the next phase of this, they've actually changed the graphs this year to make it a little bit easier for a quick glance on what conditions are looking like. But for this graph, this is where we were at this time, April 13th of last year. The blue is where we're at year to date. The gray is the average where we would be, and the red is the maximum, or in this case, the minimum recorded values for that fuel moisture. These horizontal lines, as we get down lower, are basically driving the discussion about entering into more critical fire weather, and below the lowest line takes us into a much more on edge period of time where the fuels are more receptive to carrying that fire. So again, this was the dive we were starting to take April of last year, but as you could see, we were still more moist than a normal time in that timeline, where those average fuel conditions would have been a little bit drier at that point in time. So again, we talk about the fuels, just as a quick reference. Grasses and leaf litter is what we consider the 1 hour fuels. And basically, when we talk about hours, it's the time lag that fuel is receptive to a climatic change of precipitation. So be it the fog coming in at night, be it rainfall, or being on the other end of the spectrum in an offshore wind event or a period of extreme heat and dryness that impacts those fuels. So when we talk about those hour marks, it's the amount of time it takes for that fuel to change to be a more receptive fuel for that wildfire. So as a good example would be, the grass is a 1 hour fuel. In the morning during the summer, when the fog has been in, the grass is dripping from the dew and the fog overnight, but within an hour of the sun being on it, that grass is ready to burn. Whereas with the heavier fuels, 1,000 hours it takes it to change that. And so to run that out mathematically, 1,000 hours is equivalent to 42 days for those heavier fuels to change, either for the better or for the worse. And so since we've had more precipitation and we have better fuel moisture available today, that means an extended period of time before we get into those more critical days deeper into the summer. So 1,000 hour fuels. And so on the Northern California Geographic Area Coordination Center's website, NORTHOPS, if you type in NOPS on your internet browser, it'll take you to all these graphs. This is all publicly available information. But basically, we use the 1,000 hour fuel recordings and the energy release component graph that I'll show you here in a second to basically foretell what the burning conditions are and what we anticipate them to be, because they're not as fluid in the values that we're seeing because of the reflex time that it takes for those fuels to change. So the new graph, much more user-friendly for a person that's not regularly using the graph. Firefighters are very visual people, so man, this one you can't get much better on painting a clearer picture for a quick glance. So green is obviously on this graph a period of higher moisture content, followed by the transition of the white and the yellow where things are changing, but they're not quite critical yet, down into the shades of brown. The light shade is once we've hit what we would determine is the extreme burning conditions, and the dark brown below the lower line is a point in time where we are either tying historic values or we're breaking those historic values. So as you can see on this graph, here we are on April 8th when I pulled the data. and the blue line. So they've added one other component to the graph at this point, that the blue is still the current year's values, and then the green is the next 7-day forecast. But what I didn't get a chance to put in there today is that it's truly a forecast, and so it's a snapshot in time. So I pulled the report again today, and even though last week it was forecast to drop precipitously, it actually went back up for a period of time and then continued to drop back down. So the good news is we're still, our fuel moisture is much higher this year where we're at today than it has been on average, and we're a long ways off from record. If we go back to 2020 and into 2021, we lived in the red, that the blue line was regularly at or below, or in the next chart above, those recorded values. And so it's been a nice break here in the last couple of years to have more regular conditions that we had before the 17 fires. So continuing forward, this brings us into the energy release component. So the energy release component is a good characterization of what fire season is currently and what we anticipate it looking like as we get into the peak burning conditions. So it tracks seasonal fire danger trends, and it's a good function of the both live and dead fuel models. So we're bringing our live and dead fuel moistures, we're bringing that together to create basically how hot that fire could burn. The ERC is a great tool for us because it has a low variability versus some of the other burn indexes and other data sources that we can pull, because it has the best fire danger component for indicating those effects of the intermediate and long-term drying behaviors that we may see during drought conditions or prolonged hot, dry spells. So in 2023, this time of the year, we were on a steep climb out of what was a nice low period of time after we had received some late spring rain. But as you can see, earlier in that year, we had actually spiked up into just below record values. But we came out to our date there in April, and we were right there along the line with the average conditions that we would see in a normal year. We come into this year, again, that nice color-coded chart now that has green is good. And ultimately, an item of note before we get too much farther along is that the light green section is a period of time where prescribed fire operations may have the most chance for success, not only in maintaining control of them, but also to have some desirable outcomes from that fire. So be it consumption of available dead forest fuels that are available, and or reducing that fuel load as a whole. So if you look at that map, that period of time is basically from late May through early July. And then on the backside of peak fire season, it's basically the end of September through mid to late October. And so as we see here, today we're down low on the graph, but the 7-day forecast puts us up to average. It's not a reason for concern. That's taking us back to where we would be in a normal year. So what does that mean across the state? So on the graph on your left, currently to date across the entire state of California, both in the state responsibility area as well as the federal land, the national parks and U.S. Forest Service property, we have had 251 fires for 155 acres. And so if you compare that, that's the orange on the far left of those pie charts, bar graphs. Obviously in 2022 was an entirely different story. But to go with that, the 5-year average, we're still well below that. So again, a great rainfall winter, which is why we've had the fires or lack of fires that we've had to date. here locally, same basic image that when I pulled the report on April 8th, we had a whopping 4 vegetation fires and a total of 2 acres burned as a result of those fires, compared to an average year where we would have 30 fires for a total of 17 acres burned. So now we're talking about where we're going. So the 90-day outlook, this is something that the National Weather Service puts out regularly. You can go out to a 90-day outlook. That normally it's a 1 to 3 days, 6 to 14 days, and then a 90-day outlook. To try to get as much into the crystal ball as I could, we're going to the 90-day outlook. So when we look at this is actually the forecast that we were at for this time last year. So this is 2023 when that report was pulled. At that point in time, we were forecast to have an equal chance of precipitation and an equal chance of regular average temperatures. A little bit different this year. We're still looking good on the precipitation side or normal average, but the temperatures are not going to be as easy for us on this go round. So now we're looking at a period of above average temperatures in that 90-day outlook period of time. So what does that mean? So the equal chance of rain means that we will continue to receive the small or trace amounts of rainfall that we'll get here that we normally get during the spring period here locally. But we are going to have an increase in temperature, or we're forecast to have an increase in temperature during that time. So the increase in temperature obviously aids in the drying process. And so we will probably see a grass crop that, as we have a conversation in May or June, maybe a different story on our starts and our acres, because those light flashy fuels, the grass, can rack up some acres in pretty short order versus the heavier forest fuels. That what we'll probably see as we come into fire season is that we'll have an uptick of grass fires, but those grass fires, when they get into the timber or into the brush, that the brush is actually still taking on water as we speak, that fire will slow down, if not extinguish, which allows firefighters to capture, contain those fires before they continue to grow. Which then brings us into the crystal ball from the predictive service folks at North Ops. This is the 4-month outlook. So again, this is a snapshot of time, April 1st of 2023. So coming into fire season last year, we were average potential for large fires in North Ops during April and May, followed by an average potential for us in June, although there was a lower below normal average in the Sierra as a result of that snowpack through the Mendocino National Forest, Snow Mountain area up into the Klamath. And then late fire season, well, not late fire season, late in the predictive services window, July, they were still anticipating the snow on the ground in the Sierra to give us beneficial opportunities to not have those major fires in those areas. As we come into 2024, we notice that everything looks pretty similar, with the exception that this year in June, we here locally are forecast at this point to have a lower than average, below normal potential for large fires in our county. And so when we talk about average, normally the June and July period of time, it's common to have 1 to 3 large fires within those predictive services areas. So we're still going to have the potential for large fires, but not as we would have in 2020, 2021, with those years where for several years we lived in a sea of red and above normal. And it's been a nice break again for the last 2 years to be in average or normal or below normal conditions as we come into fire season. So the reality check to that, because people always want to know what's fire season going to be like. That's why we're here today, right? There will be some that joke about it's always going to be the worst fire season ever. And it's funny, but at the end of the day, there's some truth to it, that in a wet winter, you have an increased grass crop. And as that grass crop, their annual grasses, as those grasses turn during fire season, then that's a available fuel that's ready to go on all of our roadways, our hillsides, and all of those areas where people recreate, that now are the potential for an ignition that then carries us into the heavier fuels that can create larger issues. Or you have a dry winter, and the concern is the heavy fuels that we were just talking about, those 1,000-hour fuels, they're already ready to go early in the summertime. And so that's going to create control issues for firefighters, because you have a fuel-driven fire at that point that we need more resources to be able to effectively combat those fires. Why do I bring that up? I bring that up because the next slide that I'm showing you was the outlook for the 2019 fire season, that throughout that fire season, May, June, July, August, September, we couldn't buy a fire. Fires that were igniting in historically fire-prone areas that would have resulted in major fires in any other year were contained with the initial attack resources, and they didn't get established right up until the Kincaid fire. So as we progress into fire season, it's important to maintain a vigil on what those conditions are doing. So as we came into fire season 2019, this one's a little bit later in the year, right? This, if you look at the top right corner, this was July 1st of 19, but we had above normal precipitation. The fine fuel crop, those grasses, were above normal because of all that precipitation we had. And the concern from the predictive services folks was rapid spread rates and extreme fire behavior possible when breezy. Well, we lived that during the Kincaid, right? And so to go with that, our most critical period of the year is in the fall, when we have those offshore wind events. So it's a great start to a slower fire season, but we've got a long ways to go till we get to the rains on the backside of it. As an example, I pulled, there was a conversation a while ago. There are lots of different schools of thought on heavy rainfall winters resulting in less fire danger or more fire danger. And did they perhaps, on those heavy precipitation years, did they actually aid in those larger fires occurring? So if you look at 2017, top left, we had a great rainfall water year, as well as 2019 when we had the Kincaid. But then we fast forward into 2020 with the glass, and obviously that was not a heavy rainfall year for us. So, where rainfall definitely plays a factor in the overall fire threat, my go-to is that it's fire. Fire is not a matter of if, but when. And if we have the wrong ignition at the wrong time, under the wrong conditions, then we're going to have a catastrophic fire. So the end all is that those ignitions. And so when we talk about ignitions, this is what we've experienced here in the Sonoma Lake Napa unit since 2013. The horizontal red line across the middle of the graph here is the average fires per year, followed by the fires that we experienced in those years. And so if we look at 2017 with the 17 fires, the October fires, we were below average for our fires for the year. If we look at 2019, like we talked about earlier, we were below average for those fires. However, in 2020, now that was when we had our lightning fires. And so when we have the storms that come through that drop tens of thousands of lightning strikes, that obviously overwhelms the day-to-day suppression capacities of the fire agencies across the state. And so that allows for larger damaging fires, as we experienced here in the county with the Walbridge fire. Which brings us to the red flag, right? So we get through the lightning series in the July-August period of time. Those tend to create the larger fires, which then brings us into the fall offshore wind event periods of time where we have the most destructive fires. And so I'm not sure how well, it probably shows pretty good on your screens. We experience those critical periods of time in October, right? We can see a stack of offshore wind events or red flag events during those periods of time. And obviously, we're all familiar with those events that we've had. It seems very, very gloom and doom, right? That there's so many fires. It depends on ignitions, right place, right time, right conditions. Is it a red flag? Is it not? What can we do? And the takeaway I want to leave the crowd with today is that, you know, we hopefully we have a non-eventful fire season, but there are things that we can and absolutely should be doing prior to those fire events occurring. The shot you see here in the main part of the screen is our firefighters up above Cazadero last fall, putting good fire on the ground, utilizing prescribed fire to treat those forest fuels before we have those critical fire weather conditions. The screenshot on the left was the amount of fires that got to greater than 10 acres in the Sonoma Lake Napa unit last year. We as an agency, our goal is to contain 95% of our fires to 10 acres or less. And across the board, we meet and exceed that target. But that being said, that still leaves a 5% window for large damaging fires, right? So last year was the first that I can recall where we actually had 707 acres burned during the course of wildfires in the unit. And we proactively treated with prescribed fire over 1,600 acres here across the unit. So we doubled the amount of acres under good fire conditions that we experienced under what was historically bad or wildfire conditions. So we're continuing that work. We're looking to increase those numbers yet again this year so that we can help prepare your communities and our friends and neighbors for those future fire events. Firewise USA, something near and dear to Roberta and I's heart, is that we can proactively gather communities together to pool resources and energy to help prepare our neighborhoods and our communities for those future wildfire events. The last number that we talked about at the Leadership Summit, I believe, was 17 Firewise communities and growing. I'd love to continue growing that number across the county, and Fire Safe Sonoma and your partners across the board are here to help you go down that route if your community is not already part of that program. We can prepare. CAL FIRE has some great resources there on the screen, the readyforwildfire.org, and general information on our main page at fire.ca.gov. But it helps you prepare, plan, have your plan, know what to do, and then be ready to act. 95% of our fires, 95% of our wildland fires here in the state of California, and specifically here in Sonoma County, are human caused. So if we can limit those ignitions under those critical burning conditions, then we're not going to experience those devastating fires that we've had. Resources on how to harden your home, as well as resources in Spanish. And at the end of the day, one less spark. If we can do our part and not create those wildfires here in Sonoma County as we transition out of the spring and into the summer, we have people, a lot of people doing the right thing the wrong way and putting in that defensible space around their house with a lawnmower that is not designed nor is it intended to be cutting cured annual grasses in the wildland. And we have more lawnmower fires than we would like to have as a result of lawnmowers striking rocks, having mechanical issues, and putting sparks into the cured grass as they're mowing. Another great resource that I strongly recommend is Sonoma County has a lot of great information from the Department of Emergency Management, be it SoCo Alert, a Know Your Zone, I can't stress enough to go to this website prior to a fire so that you can know what zone you're in, so that when evacuation warnings and orders are issued, that you can act in timely and react in a timely fashion to be able to protect yourself and your family and your loved ones. As a reminder, there's only two evacuation evacuation notices you're going to receive. Total of three. I'll totally botch that, but a shelter in place is not something we use in a wildland fire. So that is another evacuation notice you could get. That would be as a result of, say, a hazardous materials incident, or a situation where it's better for people to stay in their home rather than getting on the road. There's an evacuation warning. And the way that I like to look at that is you're getting onto the blocks. You're getting ready to run that 100-yard sprint. You're on the blocks ready to go, but you haven't left yet. And then followed by the evacuation order. And then when the order comes, there's no time to debate. There's no time to second guess. That is your time to gather your materials and leave. And so as we talk about red flag warnings and watches as we get deeper into fire season, I implore you to take the time when those red flag warnings are issued, that's the time to gather your go bag. It's time to gather your special documents, your critical documents. Take a lap around your house and prepare your house. Make sure those gutters are clear. The lightweight furniture is off the decks and away from the house, so that when that fire starts, you're not having to do that late in the game and delaying your exit out of the area. And then pre-plan. You have to have a minimum of 2 ways out identified before those fires happen. And I can't stress enough that you actually need to drive them before you utilize them during a low frequency, high risk event in the shape of a wildland fire that's a wind driven fall type fire that we've had. So I'll leave it at that. socoemergency.org is the resource for that. And they also have all of the information repeated in Spanish on their website. So I'll leave you with today, you provide the defense, we provide the offense. We've got the defensible space around that home that you can see in the image. Those that are in the know at this point are familiar with the 0 to 5 foot distance around a house, but that is indeed a new thing. It used to be just 0 to 30 and 30 out to 100. But we have found that during these major fires, it's the ember cast way in advance of the main body of fire that's catching that ornamental bark, the ornamental vegetation immediately surrounding your house and burning the house down long before the main body of fire ever arrives. So please do your part to provide the defense, and we'll bring in the offense. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks much, Chief.
Oh, Roberta, you're muted.
Thank you. I was talking to myself. Fantastic presentation. Thanks so much, Chief Nicholls. We do have 5 or 6 questions in the chat. Then I'll take one by one. We're going to go a little slow so they can be repeated for our Spanish speaking audience on the other channel. So first question is, we're going to have to kind of workshop how we do this. I'm not sure if I wanted to read the question and have you answer it and then have them translate it, or do it one chunk at a time. Let's try a big chunk first. So first question is, we often hear weather attributes compared to average. What goes into average? So in other words, what makes up what you're describing as average? Or are there a certain number of years since, or do you go back from the beginning of the data became available? I think I paraphrased that okay.
Perfect. Great question. And that was something I left out on the graphs that I was showing you earlier. So historically, that was a published number. And so the question was, yeah, how many years have we taken into account for average? So the newest form, that the color-coded graphs that you saw, that data goes back to 2000. So it's 20 years worth, or 23 years worth of data and growing for what is considered the averages that make that up.
Perfect. Next question is, let me wait a second for the Spanish translation to finish up for a second. And I'll just wait a few more seconds. And then I think the translators will let me know if I go too fast. Okay, so is green vegetation measured in terms of time lag? The picture looks like dead fields to me. I think it was referencing one of your images.
Yeah, so there is a live fuel moisture, but the fine dead fuel moisture is the one that we track the closest that relates to those wildfire ignitions. So I did speak to the brush taking on water at this point. I forgot to include that in the graph, but there is a difference between fine dead fuels, which are the timelines that it takes to react, versus just the percentage of water that's available in that live vegetation.
And then hopefully that makes sense. Does more rain mean that once vegetation dries out, there's more of it, meaning fuel, I think, and worse fires? Yeah, we hear this every year. Look at all the vegetation. This is going to be the worst fire season ever. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So we kind of touched on that, but the grass, right? The grass is what responds the most timely to that increased precipitation, that it takes longer for that growth from trees to translate into available fuel for wildfires. But that grass is the thing that gives us concern and pause for firefighters, because it's what we call light, flashy fuels, and it can it does burn faster, and it can shift with little wind on it or slope, and has been responsible for a majority of wildland firefighter injuries and deaths over the years. So as far as fire control, the greater grass crop concerns us for the health and well-being of our employees, and the ability to contain those fires as a small incipient fire on the side of a road or behind a house. But as far as the available fuel, as we get deeper into fire season, that's not as much of a concern.
The next question is my question, Chief. And when you had your forecast up, it seemed to go until July 24, which is a day after my birthday, by the way. I'm wondering, would it make sense for us to have another seasonal outlook, maybe in late June, to kind of see what the next few months it might entail?
Sure.
Okay, yeah, because I think those are the months, honestly, we might all be more concerned about. That seems to be our more serious weather for fire safety.
Well, and that being said, I mean, it has been a joke over the years as far as the worst fire season ever, but it truly is something that it's the ignition factor, right? So Chief Turbeville did a presentation not long ago where in October of 2022 we had significant red flag events and no major fires resulted because we didn't have the ignitions to go with the critical fire weather. So that's something that, I try to leave with folks, is that if humans are causing 95% of our fires, then if we do our part to not start those fires in the first place, we won't have major fires when it's said and done. Because at the end of the day, lightning fires occur during normal summer conditions rather than under those critical red flag warning days, right? And so while they become large fires, they're not the most destructive or the most loss of life, because it's a much slower moving fire than the offshore wind event fires that we experience deeper in the fall.
Yeah, but again, it's the human caused fires. I remember years ago when I was a relatively new fire inspector, one of my mentors, Ronnie Coleman, he used to be the California State Fire Marshal. He asked me, he's like, Roberta, do you know how most wildland fires start? There are three things. Do you know what they are? And I'm like, no, what are they? He says, men, women, and children. That's what starts most wildland fires.
Yeah.
Like, okay. So there you go. Chief Nicholls nailed it, 94, 95% of them. Um, so a couple more questions that are a little abstract, I think. Um, is it true that conditions in Sonoma Lake Napa mean you cannot let some fires beyond 10 acres to support your prescribed fire program?
So the abstract about that is that that the federal agencies own the land that they're protecting. And so they have the opportunity to manage their land as the owner of that land. In the state responsibility area, the land is not mine. It's not the state of California's, it's not Cal Fire's, it's your land, it's your neighbor's land. And so I can't allow a fire to burn uncontrolled on your property because you may be running cattle on that land that I've just wiped out your grass crop. You may have other agricultural ventures that I've damaged your source of income by your agricultural industry being impacted by that fire. And it's very dangerous depending on the size that you're working with, that if you draw what we call a big box, we start with a very small area around the fire that we want to contain that fire. But if we were to say, we're going to let that fire go from 5 acres to 500 acres, there's the weather we're experiencing at this second when the fire is at 5 acres may be drastically different than when that fire is at 495 acres. And now all of a sudden, our 500 acre box gets blown out, and now the fire ran for 15,000 acres. And in the meantime, I've run that fire through a neighborhood. So at this point in time, we will still contain the fires just as we always have because it's a wildfire event. But our goal, specifically here in Sonoma County and across the state, is that we want to introduce good fire under prescription, under the right burning conditions to proactively treat that landscape to make a more resilient landscape, a healthier landscape, and also one that's less prone to extreme wildfire behavior.
Perfect. Well, on that note, I think we're just about out of time. It's 3 o'clock now, and I imagine since we got a little bit of a late start getting the Spanish part set up, we could go a couple minutes. So I'm gonna just start wrapping it up. Use the next couple minutes to kind of close out. So thanks so much, Chief Nicholls, for the presentation today. And we need to chat about maybe doing another speaker series later in the season to kind of do that last part of the seasonal outlook for folks if you're interested in helping out
Happy
with
to come back.
Okay. And then also I want to let folks know that we are recording the Spanish section. So once that has been recorded and trimmed, we'll put that up on our YouTube channel as well. I think I alluded earlier to the fact that we might not have the Spanish available, but then it occurred to me that we're specifically recording it to make it available as well. So that will be available also. Also wanted to remind you guys that the gold resolution on the 30th, I would really love to get a lot of representatives from all the, community groups, COPEs, Firewise communities to show up that morning in the Board of Soups office to really, show some solidarity around this issue. And I think when folks do those sort of things, when opportunities for funding do show up, the board, the members of the Board of Soups, they're human. So they'll go, oh, I remember that day. They all showed up. They're such wonderful people. Yes, let's help them. So yeah, the more there, and I am assuming, Chief Nichols, you're gonna be there with me and a handful of others. Yeah,
You bet.
okay. Maybe Smokey Bear will be there. Oh, wait, that's not you guys. Never mind. I remember
Cal,
one
Captain
year,
Cal,
pardon?
Captain Cal.
That's it. Yes, I remember one year we had both Sparky and Captain Cal there when we did this. It was fun. All right. Well, thank you, Marika, and thank you, Harry, and thank you, Becca and Emily, the rest of the Fire Safe Sonoma team for making this monthly program a success. And thanks, Julie and Ashley, for providing our interpretation today. Really, really, you guys do an amazing job. We've used Julie Burns from the Communication Bridge on a lot of our projects where we needed Spanish interpretation and translation. And if you guys ever need that service, you know, I'm shamelessly promoting that organization, that company. So thanks, Julie. And then again, Ben, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day. I know you're killer busy and we do appreciate it. So yeah, and thanks everyone again for showing up. This is great. Hopefully you found this information useful. Right. With that, I'll say TTFN. Ta-ta for now.